Hello, this is Gil Rossmiller with Colorado Code Consulting, and I'll be one of your hosts for a series of videos. Today, we're going to discuss the residential energy provisions from the International Energy Conservation Code as it relates to air barrier criteria and insulation installation. Insulation and air barriers have a synergistic relationship to create the building thermal envelope of a home, meaning they work better together than individually. All insulation types provide resistance to heat flow by trapping pockets of stagnant air. When air is allowed to move through the insulation, the ability to trap air is severely reduced. Think of when you removed an old fiberglass bat insulation from a wall and wondered why it was so dirty. You think, how in the world did this happen? Air movement. Air is an excellent transport mechanism. When you add an air barrier to the assembly, it helps control how the air moves, or more appropriately, doesn't move through the assembly, and allows air permeable type insulation to perform as expected. The IECC recognizes the importance of this information to be provided, which is why in Chapter 1, insulation values, types of insulation, air barrier, and ceiling details are required to be provided on the construction documents. Insulation breaks up into two separate categories. Air permeable types, like fiberglass bats, faced or unfaced, blown-in cellulose or blown-in bat application. These types of insulations require a properly installed air barrier to perform as expected. Then we have air impermeable insulations like foam products, come in sheet goods and spray applications. There are two types. We have open cell and closed cell. Both can be an air barrier at a specific thickness based on their listing. Open cell foam is more vapor open and more like a class 3 vapor retarder and has an R value of about R3 to 4 per inch. Closed cell is a class 2 vapor retarder and has a value of about an R6 to 7 per inch. Remember that all foam plastics are required to have a thermal or ignition barrier installed per the IRC section R316. The residential portion of the International Energy Conservation Code contains Table R402.4.1.1, titled Air Barrier and Insulation Installation. The table itself has three columns. The first is labeled Component, goes through some general requirements, ceiling, attic, wall, rim joist, and other details through the home. The second is the air barrier criteria. Through each component, it then tells you where the location of the air barrier is required. The third column, labeled insulation installation criteria, tells us when and where insulation is required and how it is to be installed.
So here we have an excellent example of what the code calls an attic knee wall. You can see that it is actually going to be the same depth, so it's considered an exterior wall. So it would be the same insulation value. So for instance, if they're, in this particular case, it's a 2x6 wall, R20 or 23, depending on the level of density they have here, and it's 2x6. So it is actually conditioned space that I'm actually standing in here, and then the lower level, as we see there, that's actually going to be part of the attic. And so this nice pyramid-shaped wall here is actually separating the unconditioned attic from the conditioned space. Also, just above that, you see something as an excellent best practice. What that is going to be an insulation barrier for the blown insulation. So we're having blown insulation above us here, and what that actually does is acts as a dam, so an insulation dam. So when they blow the insulation in, it just doesn't blow over and fall down into this space here. It actually then captures it, so we actually have this wonderful full depth insulation here that's needed. And then when they blow it in on the other side, then this knee wall acts as the insulation dam for that area. It's an excellent example. This type of insulation is an air permeable type insulation. So we will actually have to have air barriers. Here we have an excellent shot of our attic insulation baffles. Now this particular home has continuous soffit vents, so you're seeing that we have the baffles in each and every truss space. You'll notice that they've got a nice 1-inch gap at the top between the sheathing and the bottom of that cardboard. It comes all the way down and is out so that the insulation, the blown-in insulation, will be on top the full thickness of the exterior wall. So these have been installed very, very nicely. The insulation will get blown in. It'll stay put. It won't suffer what we call a blowback. If we did not have these installed, although it seems hard to believe, but the wind pressures, differential pressures between our ventilated attic and the attic vents will literally blow the insulation back in the insulation bays there. So those baffles are exceptionally important when we, any kind of soffit vents, but especially when we've got continuous soffit venting like this, and we'll do every space.
All right, so here we have our rim joist, our sill plate, and then foam. So the idea is that we're needing to seal air barriers, and this is one of them at the sill. This sill plate connection to the foundation is probably one of the leakier spots that builders need to deal with. And back in the early days, that was a tough one. This one looks really, really nice and tight. Rims, we'll have to see what they've done in the basement, probably bats. But this is one of those air barrier places that we're talking about, sealing it between the house and
Here we have an area just above a sliding glass door. So you see the white insulation. That's a blown-in bat product, the holes there where they fit the hose to blow the insulation inside the cavity. Just above that, you see some fiberglass bat type insulation, and that's been split. So it's only about 2 inches thick or so, and that's just to take up the space that's the header that's behind that bat. Then on the left-hand side, you see that small cavity that's been filled with foam insulation. And as we pan down, you can see that it switches to fiberglass bat. And according to our air barrier and insulation installation table, you have a column that's in there labeled narrow cavities. And then here it says, bats to be installed in narrow cavities shall be cut to fit, or narrow cavity shall be filled with insulation that on installation readily conforms to the available cavity space. Foam does an excellent job of this, and unless you're really good at cutting fiberglass bats, this is just stuffed in there. And so it's exceptionally difficult to get bats cut into very narrow cavities like that and still get them to perform as expected. Here's a close-up of the same door here that we're looking at. You can see the foam there on the left in the narrow cavity is doing a great job of filling that and providing not only air sealing, but a great insulation type value. And notice on the door too, so on the right-hand side there, we see a close-up of the door and see that they've foamed around the door too. Again, this is where we used to stuff that fiberglass insulation, just stuff it in there as much as you could, and it just didn't work for an air barrier at all. Here we have a typical bathtub with an excellent air barrier behind the tub. Notice it's actually a piece of thermoply. It goes out the entire depth of the tub there, or height. Notice that we have a foam, nice piece of expansion foam there sealing the edges. It's required for any air barrier that all edges be sealed. Setting the stage for this picture, we're standing in a garage, an unconditioned garage, staring up at the ceiling, which happens to be a floor for a bedroom or a living space above. Like with electrical wires, we need to actually split the insulation around the water pipes and surround them, not pull them down and compress the insulation. We also need to take a look where our thermal envelope is. Currently, that appears to be the floor above. Clearly, the soffit here is not. It's part of the unconditioned space, and water pipes don't like that. So the soffit would definitely have to be insulated here so that we could keep those pipes to the inside or within our building thermal envelope. Here we have a picture that has actually several issues, but the one we want to talk about here are the electrical wires themselves. Now what we want to do here with bat insulation is either split or slice the bat so the bat now surrounds the wire, not pull the wire down out of the way, stuff the insulation up above it. We're not going to get the performance we want. Other critical spot here for air barriers is the separation now between the house and the garage. So we're standing in a garage here. We're looking through the door that connects the house and the garage. The thermal envelope here seems relatively clear. We've got insulation there as the ceiling. You can see some white blown in bat type insulation on the right hand side. Looks like we've got a little craft face bat there. We have a zip system here that looks like some structural sheathing, which will have some sheetrock put over that requirement for 1/2-inch sheetrock. And the sheetrock, I suspect, is going to be our air barrier from the garage side. All the joints will be taped and sealed. Looks like they've installed the steps in this particular picture. It'll be tough to get that sheetrock to be properly installed around there with the straps that are nailed in and stringers and things attached. So it looks like that'll have to come off to get a good job around that. The sheetrock does a good job. The critical piece, of course, is that sill plate connection there. Just putting a little mud and tape doesn't cut it. So hopefully we've got foam or something on the sill plate on the inside, or we'll have this foam after the sheetrock goes on. Thank you for watching this video. Hopefully you found it entertaining and educational. And to follow us for future videos. The funding for the video today was provided by Xcel Energy.